think shame is just a merciless narrator. It is always trying to convince us of something, foul about who we are. And whenever shame is narrating someone's life, you're not going to get curious. You're not going to understand, how your symptoms are actually holy prophets trying to get your attention. So that was just part of what I was kind of grappling with in the midst of my mid 20s was my life has to tell the truth somehow.
Welcome to 3%. We're your hosts, Jamie Haig.
And I'm Blake Roberts.
We're two best friends, fathers, husbands, and just two guys trying to figure it out.
We're also therapists, which is probably a pretty important part.
That's true.
And we believe that at our best, people are 97% honest with themselves and others. And it's that hidden 3% of emotions, needs, desires, and behaviors that we keep to ourselves that keep us bound to shame and loneliness, from which many of our issues stem.
Each week on this podcast, we'll interview leaders in the fields of psychology, theology, arts, and athletics to explore holistic masculinity. We're not here to tell you the man you need to be, but we are here to help you explore what gets in the way of being the man you want to be.
We're going to help you develop courage and give you the tools to share your 3% in the relationships that matter most so you can more deeply connect with yourself, God, and others. So, pull up a chair.
Let's get into it.
So let's be honest, let's be honest, let's be honest, let's be honest.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Season 2. This is the first episode, right?
First episode of Season 2.
Season 2, and we have got a banger of an episode for Season 2.
Would you say people should buckle up?
Oh yeah, I do.
Yeah.
You should probably buckle up. We haven't recorded in a minute, so I forgot that I say that almost every episode.
Yeah.
You definitely should buckle up today because feels weird to say, but if we're being honest, we're a little smitten because if there are two people that have influenced Jamie and I, we were talking about this before, the most in our early recovery journeys and then becoming therapists, it would be Dan Allender, who we've had on in Season 1 and we'll have on again in Season 2, and then who we get to talk to today, Jay Stringer. And Jay is somebody, if you're not already familiar with his work, who embodies maybe even more than any guest we've had, I don't know, in his work, the concept of 3%. You might know of Jay from his book that came out in 2018, Unwanted, Healing, How Sexual Brokenness Reveals Our Way to Healing. And we've gone through that book. We've taken clients through Jamie's taken clients through the course. The premise of Unwanted, if you're not familiar, is that it argues that unwanted sexual behaviors, things like pornography use, affairs, compulsive sex, are not random moral failures, but signal deeper unmet longings, shame, attachment wounds, trauma, and unmet needs in our personal life, which for me early on in recovery was like such a big shift in having more compassion toward these things that I had a lot of shame around because nobody was putting language to it in this way, especially in the Christian faith that I grew up in the way that Jay did. And that book resonated with a lot of people, has sold well over 100,000 copies and has really just changed a lot of lives. And I mean, the book draws on over, what is it? I think 3,800 men and women you did research on for that book. And so it's not just theory. It's real stories that have influenced that work, which then I'm sure we'll get to hear a little bit about how that influenced the latest book, which comes out.
Well, at the time of this episode airing, it'll be tomorrow.
So get
ready.
it in your
Pull
cart.
Out your Amazon.
The new book is called Desire, The Longings Inside Us and the New Science of How We Love, Heal, and Grow. And I'll let you expand on that. But man, it's so good to see you. I guess it's been close to 3 years now since I've seen you when you were here in Nashville and we got to have a cigar from, what was it, the Rolling Humidor that we unintentionally found?
It's true.
I don't know if I told you about that, Jamie. He came and did a conference in Nashville at our church, and we had interacted a couple times on Instagram, and he was here. I think you were meeting with your agent. It got rescheduled, So we were like, let's just go grab a drink downtown after the talk he gave. And then we stumbled upon, I'm pretty sure that's what it was called, the Rolling Humidor. It's like a traveling cigar shop, like this trailer that this
It
guy,
was a trailer
yeah,
converted into a cigar shop.
there's like a bar where you can order and like seats. And so we just
Wow.
had a cigar and got to chat. So
It was the
it's been a
perfect
while.
ending to a conference.
Yes, it
Yeah.
was. It was. But it's been a while since I've gotten to see you. So good to see you again and
Yeah.
good to meet him.
Yeah. Great to meet you. Like Blake said, when we first got into recovery, I wasn't aware of your work, and it was actually, I want to say it was actually your sponsor
Probably, yeah.
who introduced me to Unwanted. And then, like Blake said, what a shift of perspective away from, and Sam Jolman talked about this last year on our podcast, but this every man's battle idea, shift away from that perspective and taking more of an approach of, I actually do need something here. And there actually is something going on in me that is beauty and worthwhile. And I feel like Unwanted helped me tap into, for the first time, curiosity towards that part of me rather than, like the title would suggest, just treating it as an unwanted part of me. So yeah, just, I say that as just a means of, we're meeting for the first time and I get to express gratitude to you because yeah, that really did, not to make you feel uncomfortable, that really changed my life. And for the better, changed all my relationships for the better, and has really impacted the way that I show up as a therapist as well. Not only to this need, but to other needs. So thank you.
Blake, Jamie, so good to be with you talking about these matters. I mean, I think just even so much of my work is it really in that realm of your podcast title, which is the 3% of the portion of our lives that we really don't want to talk about and we don't know how to talk about well. And so that's so often what I have found is it's in that 3%, whether it's, my own struggles with porn, in my 20s, I had an eating disorder, and just one of those topics that men don't talk about very much. And so these, 3% of what we don't talk about really changes the trajectory of our lives. So I think just anytime there are more conversations being hosted around addressing these topics, I'm all for it. So more cigars, more humidors, but I'm excited for this conversation today.
Yes, a cigar will really bring out the 3%. You sit around the fire with some guys and have a cigar, and some guys it's not like until you're like about to throw the butt out, and then the 3% comes.
Yeah.
But it'll do it. Sometimes we like to give our listeners a little bit more of a perspective, like before we even getting in, or maybe it's an on-ramp into getting into talking about desire and the book and kind of like where you're at in this stage, like whatever you want to share, 30,000 foot view. What in Jay Stringer's story led to him being the guy who writes about unwanted sexual behavior and now the guy who's exploring something as simple as desire?
As simple.
Yeah. So I grew up as a pastor's kid. I'm the third of four, so middle child-ish. And, part of what I would say is like my older sister was the classic hellraiser within a pastor's family, like rebelled, challenged. My older brother, I would say, was more of the probably like more philosophical rebellion. He was reading Nietzsche at 16 and critiquing my dad's sermons. And so grew up kind of in the wake of, like all marriages, go through a lot of difficulty, complexity. My dad's under a lot of stress at work. They're all in their probably 40s, 50s at the time of my family of origin, going through all the stuff that I'm going through now. And just kind of realizing, there's a type of goodness in my heart. And yet there's also a sense that if I am good, if I speak the language, if I talk about theology, if I talk about the gospel, I can bring life and energy to my mom and my dad. And so part of what I would say formed early on in me was a provisional identity. Not my true self, provisional meaning temporary. And so this sense of I know what my mom and my dad really need to be something of a balm to their soul. I know what works well within evangelicalism. I went to a Southern Baptist high school as well. So you just kind of learn this is the persona, meaning Greek stage mask. Like if I wear this, life goes well and I get a lot of validation from it. But then inevitably, some people would say it's usually between the ages of like mid 20s to mid 50s. The soul will initiate some type of crisis to be able to crack open those provisional identities. So that crisis could be gambling, pornography, infidelity, uh, you know, whatever it might be, but that's part of the task is something breaks you open and exposes this provisional identity. And for me, growing up in the church, there was always this sense of if we were to borrow from Holy Week, like if Friday is a day of trauma, Saturday is a day of hell, and then Sunday is obviously resurrection. I could maybe talk about some of my Friday and Saturday experiences, but only if it was very quickly moving into Sunday. And so, you mentioned Dan Allender. I met Dan in kind of my early 20s, and he was the first Christian that gave me permission to really talk about my Friday experiences and Saturday experiences of hell without having to kind of cover it up with some dogmatic story of redemption. And so that was kind of just that sense of, okay, what do I do with these competing desires in me? Like, I want to go into ministry, I want to be a counselor, but I'm also a man struggling with a lot of entitlement in past relationships. I'm dealing with a lot of pornography. I have eating disorders. Like, I am a freaking mess. And how do I reconcile that there's something beautiful and compelling emerging, but also something that was deeply hidden, fueled by shame? And so I think that was kind of that initial stage of, ugh, I've got to dive into the 3% and see what's being exposed. And I think shame is just a merciless narrator. It is always trying to convince us of something, foul about who we are. And whenever shame is narrating someone's life, you're not going to get curious. You're not going to understand, how your symptoms are actually holy prophets trying to get your attention. So that was just part of what I was kind of grappling with in the midst of my mid 20s was my life has to tell the truth somehow. So
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to back up a second because we just looked at each other when you so nonchalantly said your symptoms. I mean, there's so much I could ask you about, but your symptoms are, what'd you say, holy prophets calling for your attention?
yes.
Please say more about that.
Yeah, so this is I don't wanna bore people, but stay with me. It's really
It won't bore
fascinating.
us.
So, okay. So there is this French psychoanalyst by the name of Lacan, and one of the things Lacan would say is that every person, every patient, every client that goes into therapy has a symptom. And not a French speaker, but essentially what the French word is for symptom is symptôme. But then what he says is that every symptom is a saint-home. And what the meaning of saint-home is in the French is holy man. And so this is a Lacanian concept that every symptom of your life is the holy man that's trying to get your attention. But if you think about it just in terms of if you have a bad back, gin and tonic or ibuprofen or something, rather than listening to like, okay, maybe my posture is off, or maybe I went through a car accident and jury rigged a solution to this thing, or something like depression. We, form medication from time to time for mental health therapy, but sometimes depression is the soul's way of saying like something in your life force has been depressed. And so rather than just trying to treat the symptom, we want to understand what is that symptom trying to tell us. And so often, unwanted symptoms, whether it's porn use, anxiety, depression, that is the soul's way of telling the truth about what happened to you. And we don't like to listen to our symptoms. We would rather shoot them, manage them, get internet monitoring put on, anything to really avoid a confrontation with what our soul is asking us to confront.
I mean, if that bored somebody, you might be in the wrong podcast.
Lacanian psychoanalysis.
Yeah, I've never even heard of him. Hey, we want to pause real quick and let you know about something. We know a lot of you don't just want more content. You want connection, you want practice, you want tools, you want depth. And that's why we created The Basement. It's our private community for anyone who's ready to go beyond surface level and actually engage their emotional lives. So every month we release a deep dive Q&A episode that's only available inside the community. We answer real questions from real listeners in a more intentional way than we do on our regular feed. We also share guided reflections and practical tools to actually help you apply this stuff. And you'll be connected to other people who are doing the work too.
It's $10 a month or $100 for the year, and you can cancel anytime. And honestly, even if you've been listening to our podcast for a while and you're not sure how much you'd use The Basement, becoming a member is still a great way to support what we're building. It helps us create more spaces, more conversations, and more resources for anyone who wants and needs them. So check out the link that will be in the show notes. If you're ready for more than just listening, come join us in The Basement. Yeah. I mean, in addition to that, you said pretty quickly there too, you were like, I put on this persona, which is the Greek word for mask. Is that what you said?
Stage mask. Yep.
Yeah. Again, something else I didn't know about the word. And to think that we are playing a role that way because we do not want to listen to the holy man who's trying to get our attention is just like mind-blowing to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all of us have that provisional self of kind of just learning. Like maybe you were the comedian, maybe you were, the Nietzsche philosophical challenger. Maybe you're the golden kid or the scapegoat. But we all play these roles. And again, I'm not just trying to like tear down the stage mask. I mean, that stage mask was developed. Like you fine-tune that thing. And so I'm not just saying throw it out, but I'm saying like we've got to honor the formation of that mask and then also reconcile the reality that mask served us well, but it's time to develop a new way of being in the world. And so that's the gift of our addictions. That's the gift of our marital conflicts. That's the gift of our existential crises, is that they are trying to serve us. But they are miserable and they are so hellish when you're in the midst of them. But that's why we need good therapy, good friends, is because, we can't really see our face outside of a selfie, outside of Zoom, unfortunately. So on one level, we're really not designed to see ourselves as much as we see ourselves.
Yeah.
But the flip side of that is that we're not very good at seeing ourselves. And so therefore we need others to kind of help us understand these masks, these challenges, these symptoms that, left to shame, it will become a pretty harsh narrator of why that thing came to be.
Okay, you brought this word up a number of times, and I imagine that it does relate to even what you write about in Desire. Shame. How are you conceptualizing or making sense of what shame really is, like the voice of shame? Is it, the some of the language in the faith spaces would be like shame is the enemy, telling you lies about yourself. Some more pop psychology spaces, maybe I'm thinking of like internal family systems, would say that shame is more of like an internal critic that's actually there to help you, but it has found a way that kind of beating yourself up has done that. I'm just curious how you, and I know like a lot of the men that we work with struggle with shame, if that's like kind of a foundational thing.
I think some of them would maybe misinterpret it as conviction as well.
Oh yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. So I'm just curious how you're conceptualizing what shame actually is and what the role of it is, and maybe even how does that play
Yeah.
into desire.
Yeah, let me go through a couple definitions that I've found helpful. So, everybody's probably heard of the Brené Brown definition that it's this, painful, unpleasant experience that you are unworthy of love or belonging. All for that definition. Some of the ways that neuroscientists talk about shame is they use the example of a manual transmission car. So, don't know if you all have ever driven one. I had a Ford Contour, 98 Ford Contour,
Yeah, you
had
did.
manual transmission. And, if you've ever driven that or driven with someone, you know that there are three pedals: the gas, the brake, and the clutch. Well, what the neuroscientists say happens with shame is that as children, we have something called a sympathetic nervous system, and that is the gas pedal. Uh, Children are all sympathetic nervous system. I remember when my kids were watching the documentary Free Solo, which shows Alex Honnold, free soloing, meaning without ropes, going up Yosemite. My kids like stopped watching it and then just started turning our living room into a rock face and climbing up. Like that is sympathetic
Amazing.
nervous system. But then we also have a parasympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for rest and digest. And that's essentially the brake pedal. Like, I say to my kids, no, you can't stay up all night. No, you can't go to bed without brushing your teeth. Like, desires in the sympathetic nervous system are good, but desires have to be disciplined if they are really going to develop. The parasympathetic nervous system is the brake pedal. And what the neuroscientists say happens with shame is that your sympathetic nervous system, you're trying to seek something out, you're curious about something, you touch something, you're aroused by something, you pursue something, and then all of a sudden, maybe an authority in your life, the church, a mother, a father, looks at that raw desire that you have, they don't like it, and then they slam on the brake. And if you're thinking about a manual transmission car, if someone slams on that brake without the clutch, what happens is the car
stalls
jolts
out.
forward, and it doesn't just stall gently, it like harshly moves forward. And what the neuroscientists say is that that's the experience of shame inside of our bodies, that we were pursuing something, we were longing for something, and then at some point in our life, the brake system was slammed, and it was, you should not have wanted that. Look at where that led you. And then that kind of jolting forward without the clutch is what gets internalized as shame. So I would put like the clutch as like kindness, right? Like that's what I was trying to do with Unwanted was, yeah, I'm not saying you should just drive into anything that you want, but like how is slamming on the brakes or how is trying to kind of like set up internet monitoring or pedal monitoring, how is that going to help you at any level? Like we need the clutch of kindness to be able to understand that. So shame, it creates this kind of internal sense of like, I'm not good, I'm not worthy, I'm unwanted, there's something foul or wrong with me. And that's a self state. So I like IFS language from time to time, but I think the more accurate language would be like, there is an 8-year-old boy inside of me. There is a 13-year-old boy inside of me. And those self states are really what we are working with. And so a lot of, when you're meeting me, I'm 42 years old, but there's also a 13-year-old boy that was shamed at middle school, called Donut, kind of Pillsbury Doughboy era, and kind of had his belly, uh, you know, index finger into the belly to go, ooh. So integration for me is the recognition that like, okay, I've got this 13-year-old boy in me who has a lot of body shame. But then in the absence of having a good mom and a dad that were attuned to me, that were checking in with how I was doing, food became such a surrogate place of soothing for me.
Mm.
And in the Old Testament, so much of what we have our shame so much of what creates shame is what we put our trust in. And that's the dilemma, is that, I was bullied, I was traumatized as a kid, but then I started putting my trust in food to help me. And then that became the basis of more shame. And then the more shame that I felt, the more I needed to eliminate body shame, which then became the introduction of pornography. So I have shame about my trauma. I have shame about my patterns of eating. And now and that's what shame does, is this compounding interest of the whole thing is screwed. And that's where I really like, I think somewhere in Dr. Kurt Thompson's The Soul of Shame, he says that it's not just a psychological concept. It is a diabolical force that is against all creativity and wonder in your life, something along those lines. And I think that's what I resonate most deeply with, is that the more loud the voice of shame is in my life, the less creative I want to be, the less I want to write, the less I want my face to be seen. And so I think that's the movement of shame, is to get us stuck in some of these self states that says, hey, like, there's nothing great about you. And if you try to move forward, I'm going to expose you. And so at some level, shame is, yeah, it's historic. But I think so much of what I'm learning is the power of kind of priming my future in really destructive ways.
I now understand why people do like 2-hour podcast interviews, because there's like 10
Right.
different directions that we could go just from that response.
Right.
What's
Yeah.
coming up for you?
Well, I think where it takes me, and I don't want to go there too quickly, but I think where it takes me is, okay, then what? So, like, shame is this, as you said from Kurt Thompson, this powerful force that is against all creativity, and it dictates your self concept. Well, then, you're writing this book called Desire. I'm like, well, how do you navigate then such a powerful voice in pursuit of a desire when you were just explaining how you had this desire for food? It became where, as Chuck DeGroat would say, where you're taking your hunger and thirst. And then you recognize that I need to change my relationship with this and my relationship with body image. And then that takes you, that's a helpful desire, but then it takes you to this place of something else that compounds your shame. So I guess my question becomes, well, what do you do with that? And what does it mean to desire something well?
Such a good question. And, my book Desire is built on these 5 core desires that I found in the research, but also in my clinical work. And that's a desire for wholeness, which is about a desire to understand your story, to understand the roots of where you come from. A desire for growth, which is all about individuation, which I want to spend a little bit of time talking about, also called differentiation. A desire for intimacy, a desire for pleasure, and then finally a desire for meaning and purpose. And part of what we found in the research is that these are not a la carte menu options that you get to pick or choose. This is one thing on desire that you have to choose all of it. So what happens to a lot of people is we over-index in a particular desire, right? Like, the therapy all-stars that they're like, I'm going to know my story, I'm going to go to counseling, I'm going to do everything I can. I read The Body Keeps the Score, but they have no sense of how does that connect to like how they don't know how to do intimacy, and they still keep showing up as orphans in their life, or they just don't know how to do it. Or there's other people that are like out to crush their careers. They're going to make a lot of the money, become Joan of Arcs in their career, and yet their marriages are imploding. And so that's part of what we find, is that it can become very easy to become over-indexed in one realm of desire. So what do we do about it? Is we have to, I would say, begin with our story. We have to begin to understand what are the formative themes that are shaping my desire. So one example that I love from Harry Potter is when Harry looks into the mirror of Erised, that's desire spelled backwards. And so when he looks into this mirror, what Harry sees as an orphan is an image of his parents. When his friend Ron Weasley looks into it, what does he see? He sees he's like the Quidditch champion, he's the head of the house. It's a much more narcissistic oriented fantasy. And so that would be just a really practical question is when you look into the mirror of Erised, like what images do you see? And those are some of your most ardent longings and wishes. And so part of the task then is, if I were to look at it at different points in my life, I might say, I want to be, I want to sculpt my body into a particular physique. I want to have a partner with a lot of life and vitality. And so, where does a lot of that come from? Was my own family of origin, my own shame. And so, shame is also, not fully diabolical. It's also creating an imagination and a longing for redemption if we can tap into it. And so when I am thinking about the category of growth, a lot of times that's where a desire for self-mastery comes in is I don't want to deal with my childhood bullying and vulnerability. I just want to run marathons, or I just want to get my whoop to kind of get a sense of how my sleep is going. And I want to optimize my health because I don't want to deal with those stories. And so real integration is the recognition of like, I have a story, I have wounds, I also have beauty and longing, and all of that comes into kind of this concept of differentiation. So I'll pause there, or I can keep
What
going.
we can keep going. I just was gonna say that's so helpful to even think about those 5 categories, and it's like you're naming that they're not in and of themselves bad. It's not bad to desire the meaning and purpose in the career or the desire to like make sense and understand your story, but the way that they can be over indexed is just such a helpful framework to think about. And um,
Yeah, and that they can be. I'm probably assuming here, but that they can be real places of beauty, but they can also be real traps. And I like as you're talking, I'm projecting my own desires, my current desires. I'm reevaluating things,
yeah,
but
Yeah.
I'm also curious before I'm like, oh my gosh, this is what this is related to, which I know about some of my desires and have made friends with some of that, but um, I'm curious about this differentiation idea.
Mhm.
yeah. Tell us what that means.
Yeah. So differentiation is taken from cell biology. So think about like the growth of a plant. Like for a plant to grow, those cells are all the same genetic material, but then they have to differentiate or divide in order to promote the health of the plant. And so this is such an important concept that I'm working in Desire. And it's really about how do we as individuals individuate and differentiate. The dilemma for all of us is that sometimes when it came to growing a sense of self or having our own desires, or I would just, in the biblical language of like developing your talents, that became something like you're going to be selfish, you're going to be narcissistic. So you better kind of suppress who you are and just kind of blend in and serve others was kind of the highest calling. And, when I think about narcissism, when I was in high school, a narcissist was like someone that was full of themselves, right? Like they needed their Tommy Hilfiger clothes. That this kid that I'm thinking about had a Ford
Don't age
Mu-
yourself here. Careful.
Ford Mustang Cobra, like Saline edition. Like it was just someone like this kid is full of himself. But clinically speaking, what I learned is that, narcissism is not a fullness of self, it's an absence of self. So you don't know who you are, but you're looking to these symbols and these external reference points of this is who I am. I've sold this many copies. My podcast has had this many downloads. My partner is this attractive, right? Earn this much money. And all of that becomes a reflected sense of self. And what happens a lot when your reflected sense of self breaks down is you might feel shame about that. You need relief from that. That could be substance abuse, gambling, porn. Or I think what really happens in the context of intimacy and romantic relationships is that you don't like who you are. And so then you try, and your vision of intimacy is that my partner really needs to validate me. She needs to soothe me. And you end up handing over to your partner this laundry list of unmet needs and longings. And then you wonder why your marriage lacks passion and energy. And a lot of that comes down to, well, you've never differentiated. You don't know who you are. And so a lot of us are arriving at the stages of our life very underdeveloped. And so whether it's the crucible of marriage, the crucible of, just adulthood, is that it's going to ask you to confront where you are underdeveloped and where we all have some level of narcissism in us that's looking for this reflected sense of self to validate who we are. So, differentiation is that really slow, agonizing process of confronting all that's underdeveloped and refusing a shortcut, refusing external validation, because that's really what I'm finding is messing with intimacy, is that we want our partners to validate us, to want us, to choose us, even when we're not willing to do that for ourselves. And I think it becomes a little bit like a hostage situation in a lot of marriages and friendships is, hey, I don't really like myself, but I really need you to want sex with me. And it's like, wait, how did that come to be? So the way that desire is designed is you're going to learn your story, you're going to learn how to differentiate, develop a sense of self, and that's the sense of self that you're going to bring into intimacy, into sex, and then eventually into meaning and purpose in your life. But there is a particular order of development that's really necessary to grow.
And that's an order that you found through the research that you did, or?
Yeah, research and clinical practice was kind of looking at, like, for couples that did really well, what was good about them? And we found, things like confidence, that they liked who they were. That led, unsurprisingly, to higher marital and sexual satisfaction. But even confidence was not random. It was predicted by someone's story. So, sometimes we get an identity that's in reference to our family of origin, right? So, uh, when the Bible says, you must leave your mother and father, a lot of times we think about that as geographical, but I would say it's much more psychological than geographical. In the New Testament, when Jesus is saying, "For I've gone to prepare a place for you, in my Father's house there are many rooms," it's that image of when you get married, you build an extension onto your Father's house. So geographically, they're very close to each other, but there is intended to be a significant severing of all loyalties to your mother and your father. And, that's what I experience a lot in couples counseling is, when it comes to the holidays, people are like, we really want to go to Cabo. We really want a beach or we want to ski. But like, if we don't go back home to the Midwest to be with our aging mother and father, they're going to be so depressed this Christmas. And it's like, how are you now offering your body and your children's body as a type of Eucharist to their emptiness? So you haven't fully left loyalty there, but also, let's say you grew up with a mother or a father who just didn't see you and engage you. And in the midst of some of the heartache of your life, you started going to alcohol, you started going to porn in order to self soothe. That's still a type of loyalty to your family of origin because you're still reenacting some of the formative patterns there. So, a good marriage requires just radical departure of loyalty to your mom, to your dad, to those ways that you learned how to make your life work in the midst of all the heartache that you went through in childhood.
I gotta say one thing real quick.
Okay, go.
I was talking to a friend who is also familiar with your work that we were gonna get to talk to you, and one of the things I said that I was just reminded of when you said that, when you were like, how are you offering your body as a Eucharist to your, what did he say, parents'
Emptiness.
emptiness? I was like, something I've realized about Jay is that he has a very, and I'm saying this as a compliment, because I make up that it just like comes so natural to you because you say it in the flow of a sentence like it's nothing. And then each time Jamie and I are like, it's like we got hit by a sound wave. We have such a gentle yet like strong, piercing way
Yeah, poignant.
of naming like the truth that is really difficult to name.
Yeah. I don't want to take away from what you were going to ask, but I think I want to ask, at least somewhere in this, I want to ask, like, how do people begin that process of differentiation? Like, we're speaking about the necessity of it,
Mm-hmm.
and how that how not doing it can show up as I don't like myself, and I'm asking you to like me enough for me to feel filled up enough to be here in
Yeah.
this marriage.
Mm-hmm.
What does it look like to practically begin the process where I'm listening to this podcast and I go, okay, well, I want to feel like I'm enough for me, so I can bring a full me to my marriage or to
Yeah.
any relationship I'm in, but I don't even know how to begin that. What would you say to that person?
Yeah, a couple directions would be, I always think of like when I'm talking about differentiation, intimacy, I think about like a symphony. So if you were to go to, Nashville, New York City, like if you were to go to a symphony, you want to make sure that your violinist is like the best in the city. You want to make sure that your percussion team knows what they're doing, enjoys what they're doing. But the magic of a symphony is not just differentiated instruments and differentiated musicians. It's somehow they're able to come together to make magic, to be able to make music and melody together. And so part of what I would invite people to consider is like, when in your life do you actually feel desire? And so that could be uh, when you are listening to music, it could be on a mountain, it could be when you are baking or playing a musical instrument. But it's Annie Dillard uses this language of I never knew I was a bell until the moment I was lifted up and struck. And so all of us need to take just that inventory of like, what are the 5 bell-like moments in your life where like something inside you was struck and you're like, this is who I am. It's not just what I do, it's who I am. This, if I could have this day all over again, this is what I would be doing. And so, your desires are trying to wake you up with regard to what God has put inside of your heart. And I think that's part of the nature of the talents is that, God has given people talents of language, of music, of beauty, of building things. And so if you're bearing those talents, you're not you're not good to your community, to those around you. So I think you have to kind of say like, where do I come alive? And then get really practical where, James Clear would say, we don't rise to the level of our goals, we fall to the level of our systems. And so if you have a desire for something, it can't just be a goal to become a better musician or to bake more. You have to put it into your calendar and create that system to accomplish it. Simultaneously, you have to understand your story. You have to understand like what were some of the places where heartache entered in. Or when you think about, I remember when porn first entered into my life, it was a season where I had just been through a breakup. I was working for a church that I was like, made me love ministry. But then some people kind of joke that ministry is a little bit like learning how sausage is made. Like once you kind of see the process, you don't want it. And that was kind of my first experience. So I had a breakup, I had church crisis. And that was the season that I became really immersed in porn, was this kind of breakdown of my life. So I think that's what you also have to require is what's the primary problem that you're facing? Could be relational conflict, could be an unwanted behavior, could be just like this self-concept of I'm always going to be poor, I'm always going to struggle with this thing. And then float back to a time in life where you think that that voice got really cemented. And so that's where I would say, Dan Allender uses this notion of like, what's your heaven yes and your hell no? But I think those are good categories as well. Is like, what do you love? What's your like, yes, this is what I'm going to pursue with everything in me. But also, how are your traumas, your heartaches informing that sense of defiance against, I'm going to stand against this thing. And so those are some practical ways, is just kind of get to know, where do you feel alive, but also like, where is shame narrating you to stay really small, but then float back to a time in life where that really got established. And if you're up for it, get a beer, get lunch with a friend and talk about those two things.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that at the end. That was something I was going to add, and kind of like one of the things we encourage on this show and even in our private community is like the relational component of this work. It's why Jamie and I are doing this, like are talking about this stuff with somebody safe is really what helps change those systems in like a lasting way and build the accountability that is kind of integral to all these different desires, different than maybe the filtering accountability we've kind of talked about before.
Well, can I say something quick about that?
Nope.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Like even what I hear Jay saying is like this, like notice those no's, those narratives, and think back to where did that get cemented, and then the taking of that to others. Like the looking back at where that got cemented, I think deserves to move us to grief. And grief, as people who listened last season, like we believe that grief needs a witness. And so taking it into community with others is a way that you're being held in the place that you are now expressing your sadness about this story that you've come to believe about yourself. And you're connecting a dot for me that's really rich.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so beautifully said. That's where I think I'm not just trying to like become another conservative voice to question our desires, but I think our desires need a healthy interrogation. And Jamie, I love what you said, and I work through that category of grief as well. But grief has the power to change what you desire. So, I mean, just from a very basic level, if I don't grieve the trauma, the bullying, the body shaming, what do you think is going to take over my desires?
Right.
So, one of my clients, wanted to get to like, I don't know how he came up with like $8 million was basically going to be what he tried to retire on. And you ask him kind of what's the taproot of that desire. And he just said, my dad always struggled with finances growing up, and we were just always poor. But then as we began to get into his story, the wounds of his life were not due to like poverty of finances. They were due to a poverty of love. And as he began to recognize that and grieve that, there was this sense of, I am over indexed in my career and I'm doing the same exact thing. I've mislabeled this thing as a poverty of finances, which is setting me up to work my entire life to achieve, to reach a particular number that I'm abdicating all care and discernment and connection to my kids. And I'm actually not just reversing it, I'm repeating the same dynamic of another poverty of love in my family. It looks different. And so that sense of grief that he was able to have when his kids were young, he wrote me probably a year ago and just said, like, that session changed the trajectory of my life and what I do, because I had mislabeled an issue. And I think that grief does that to us. Like when we grieve almost any dimension of our life that is hurting us or has hurt us, watch how your desires will shift. in the middle of that.
Thank you for giving me content to take to my therapy next week. If I'm leading with vulnerability, like we try to do on the show,
Don't
when
do
you
that.
named those 5 core desires,
Yeah, don't do that.
the 2 things that stuck out to me where I initially was like, yeah, I'm over indexing some in those was the first one, which you said was what was it? I wrote it down. Wholeness, which was like the desire to understand and know your
where you
story.
come from.
Yeah. Yep. That, and then meaning and purpose.
Yeah.
And probably because some of what I do in my meaning and purpose as a career is very, like, as a therapist, as somebody who's like, we're building this, it is all the thing I am building as a career is so associated with making sense of your story and helping other people make sense of their story. And I've got 2 young kids, and my wife left her full-time job in September. It's like all these great things. But there is some definitely over-indexing for me in those areas. And I probably would have said something similar, some version of what your client said to you. And there was something gently piercing, as I mentioned earlier, when you were explaining his story, that is going to give me a lot to think about. I want to keep talking, but we got to start to land the plane, and I want to do it by asking 2 questions. The first one is going to be sort of a general, systemically, how can we help with desire? And then the second one, I'm going to have you speak directly to the person listening. So we've got a lot of people that listen that are in faith communities. They're just a part of a church, or maybe they're even a part of a leadership role, or they just volunteer, or they've been hurt by the church and they're trying to figure out how to orient back into those faith spaces. So the first question, which would be the more systemic one, is what does it look like what would it look like for faith communities? And that could even be friendship circles, not even just a church community, to begin to disciple desire instead of suppress it.
Yeah. So, love that you're using disciple. So discipline, disciple, from the same root word to teach. And so this is from the theologian Ronald Rolheiser, but one of the things he would say is that all children are born with raw desires. And raw desires are not going to be developed. And what he would say is the role of the church is to connect those raw desires to the wider flourishing of a community. So, yeah, you have a young toddler that loves to eat, loves a donut. And so the role is not to pathologize and say, don't eat too many sugary foods. You don't want to have that. It's to kind of say, okay, you love this donut. And now how do we connect that to, a dad or mom hang session? How do we bless other people with this great donut and kind of drop it off at a friend's house? And so the role is to disciple desire. And that's the thing that I just want to bang my head against, is people are like, yeah, desire will turn you into a worse version of yourself. It'll make you selfish. And I'm like, no, it's the suppression of it. Or indeed, if you just kind of blindly follow your desire without trying to develop it. But that should be the task of a Christian community and a family system, is what are the raw desires here? And then how do we actually steward them, develop them, so that they become this powerhouse of connection, purpose, and love? And so we've got to discipline the desires that we're seeing by saying, okay, like, what do you love? And as kids in a family system, everybody's going to love different things. Some might love sports, some might love music, some might love baking, some might love just intentional time away and special trips. And that becomes part of the sacredness of a family. Is it's not just that dad's desires or the most entitled kid's desires or the most physically talented athletic person's desires get over indexed. We are a family system, and we learn how to honor and how to invest and sacrifice for all of our desires. And so I think we really need to kind of have a different vision that doesn't pathologize desire, but really kind of says, like, raw desire needs to be connected to the life of the family, to the life of the church. And that's really where human flourishing functions. Because Dan Siegel would say that we need two things, or the strongest systems in the world, he would say, are those that are uh, differentiated and meaningfully linked together. And so it's that sense of authenticity and belonging. And that's what
Yeah.
families and churches teach you, is differentiate, become who you are, but also how do we come together? So
Yeah.
For
That's
mutual
longer
flourishing.
answer.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. So coming soon, the workbook of by Jay Stringer titled "How to Disciple Your Desire."
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
can
the
have that. I'll
workbook
give you that
connected
title
to
if you
the
haven't
book
already
is
come up with it.
great. It's like therapy in a box. It's going to give you all the exercises, because part of what, Dan would say a lot in our classes is all change happens in particularity. You don't
Yeah.
change through telling 30,000-foot view. You have to enter into the dirt of your story. And so
Yep.
that's what workbook and
Wait, is there actually a
community.
workbook?
There is a workbook. Yeah.
There's a workbook that comes with the Desire book too that's coming
Doesn't
out?
come with it. It's separate, but it's basically
Yeah,
going to
separate.
allow you
Awesome.
to enter into the dirt, enter into the stories, enter into the longings.
Awesome.
Love that.
So good. Okay, last question.
Yep.
If you were sitting across from the listener, maybe you're having a cigar with them, and they are stuck in the same cycle or cycles they swear that they would never be stuck in again, what is one thing? So summarize this whole episode and all of your research about the book. What is one thing that you would want them to know about desire or hope or both?
Mm-hmm. I would say that the problem that they're dealing with is not random. And so the invitation is to become very curious about how that sorrow, how that sin, how that pattern came to be. And so one of the things that I was thinking about is kind of thinking about myself as someone in his mid-20s. Just remember kind of some of the visuals without kind of creating disgust in people, of just my own bulimia. And then also a night that I was kind of both bulimic, but also using porn. And it was just one of those kind of images of, this is probably the highlight of my degradation reel. And so that sense of like, what in the world is happening to me? And again, so much shame, so much narration of kind of how I should not be in ministry, how I should, really just stop doing what I'm doing, kind of try and find health, maybe a new career. And that was kind of that process for me of like, okay, I'm miserable. And that's what put me into therapy. And, one of my first therapy sessions, I had a therapist that just kind of said, not just like, what type of porn do you watch? Or not just do you watch porn, but what types of porn are you drawn to? And I was so pissed at her question of, why are you asking me to enter into more particularity, therefore more shame? I would rather you just give me internet monitoring or tell me to like withdraw from seminary. But part of what she started asking me to grapple with was, in many ways, my dinner table growing up. And so that dinner table was a place of a lot of tension. My family had an answering machine right next to the dinner table. And we would get messages all the time from crises that were happening in our church. This was like pre-Netflix. I wasn't allowed to watch The Simpsons or like even Touched by an Angel at times, but like somehow we could listen to the gossip reel on this answering machine. And that became, just my dad would attend to these crises. And my role in my family was to check in to see how my mom was doing in the midst of that time. And so I would check in with her, and then my dad would be gone or go to bed early. My mom would go to bed. And that became something of just my eating habits back in that time. So when I got into therapy, it was like the matrix began to unravel for me of like, oh, I'm understanding why food. I'm understanding porn preferences and what I'm doing to women, what I'm seeking out. And that's become something of the basis of my career. So, I mean, my middle school self, indeed, my 20-year-old self would be horrified of having this podcast today. But I think that's how deeply committed God is to our redemption, is that left to our own, we narrate our life in a way that's like, I'm foul. There's something about me that's unworthy of love or belonging. But through the power of curiosity, through understanding your story, you begin to change. You begin to understand these things. And, your wounds one day become part of the formation of the greatest talents that you bring to the kingdom of God.
Mm.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if they would be horrified. I wonder if your 20-year-old self was sitting here with us, he might be, he might feel very like seen by the way that you have honored him and therefore helped a lot of other people honor the younger
Themselves.
versions of them that would be very embarrassed.
Maybe
that
maybe
would be
both
great
feeling.
integration.
Probably both. Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably both.
Both
Yeah.
feelings.
And also like, stop talking about this.
Yeah.
Both of those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My younger self would
Yes.
probably be relieved
Yeah.
that I'm saying some things and also terrified of what that would mean for him.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
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 Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
Man, Jay, so thankful for you, for your work, for your continued curiosity about yourself
Yeah.
and systems that help all of us. Yeah, really grateful. And we did this all the time last year, but we mean it every time, I think, too, that we can't wait to talk to you again and continue to flourish our friendship with you. But
We love that.
just thank you for coming. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you for the work that
this
you all
was a
are doing
treat.
to host this conversation. It's so necessary to dive into these themes. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks for planting the seed all those years ago for us.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
And you get cigars out of it, and
That's right.
potentially a
right.
3% hat. So it's all
Yeah,
worth
there
it
you go.
to me.
It'll be coming.
Yeah.
It'll
All
come.
worth it. Well, to everybody listening, we're glad you're here. Keep showing up. You're worth it.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to another episode. Listen, we're working on some really practical resources to help you connect more deeply with yourself and others. So if you head over to our website, 3percentco.com, you can learn more about that. The link will be in the show notes. And this is the part of the show where we ask you for some help. Listen, we don't have a big fancy production team. We're recording these in my therapy office in between sessions and in the margins of our life. We just really believe in the message that much. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and rarely would I take the time to review and rate a show, just because honestly, I forgot. It wasn't until we started doing this show that I realized doing that actually really does help these platforms notice our show and get the word out. And so if any of this is impactful to you, we would love it if you took a second to leave us a review, rate us, or if you want to just do it the old-fashioned way, text this link to a friend and say, hey, let's talk about this episode. Whatever you do, make sure to follow us on whatever platform you're listening to so you never miss an episode. We're really grateful you're here, and we'll see you next week.
So let's be honest.